The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson as Flight 451 cruised at 35,000 feet. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was warm and relaxed. Families chatted, the hum of conversation blending with the faint whine of the engines. Travelers settled into their routines, headphones, books, and half-empty cups of coffee. No one imagined the events that would soon shatter the fragile peace. At seat 22A, Ellie Graham was staring out of the window, her headphones on but no music playing. She was distracted, her thoughts bouncing between the conference she just left and the rare vacation she was finally taking. Beside her, a fidgety teenager shifted in his seat, mumbling something about turbulence to his father. Ellie ignored him. The skies were clear, the view endless. It was all too perfect to be disturbed by something so mundane. At the front of the plane, a flight attendant named Marla did her final walkthrough of the aisle. She gave a practiced smile to an elderly couple and adjusted a pillow for a man who'd already drifted off to sleep. She felt the faintest vibration beneath her feet, a sensation too subtle to worry her. Planes rattled all the time, this wasn't her first flight. In the cockpit, Captain Raymond Dunn adjusted his headset and glanced at the radar. "Looks like a smooth ride all the way to Phoenix," he said to First Officer Jenna Torres, who responded with a small nod, her eyes scanning the controls. They'd flown together countless times, their coordination almost telepathic. The faint glow of the instrument panel bathed them in soft light. Neither could have known that within moments, their world would be plunged into chaos. It began with a sound, a deep, guttural groan from somewhere within the plane. Ellie turned her head instinctively, noticing how others around her did the same. The engines grew louder, their pitch rising unnaturally. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Nervous laughter bubbled up from a few seats. Marla straightened, her eyes darting toward the rear of the cabin as if she could pinpoint the source of the disturbance. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," a calm voice echoed through the cabin. "We've encountered a minor issue and will be performing routine checks. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The tone was steady, practiced, but to Ellie it sounded wrong, too measured, too rehearsed. The plane lurched. Drinks spilled? A baby cried out, the sharp sound cutting through the growing murmurs. Ellie gripped the armrest as her pulse quickened. Marla was moving down the aisle now, her professional demeanor cracking at the edges. She exchanged hurried words with another flight attendant near the galley. Ellie turned to the teenager beside her. He looked pale, his wide eyes fixed on the window. Beyond the glass, the sky was no longer serene. A strange, swirling gray had swallowed the golden hues, clouds thick and unrelenting. It felt suffocating, like the sky itself was closing in. The next lurch was violent. Passengers screamed as the plane tilted sharply, overhead compartments bursting open. Bags and loose items tumbled into the aisle. Ellie's stomach dropped as though gravity itself had shifted. The oxygen masks deployed, yellow cups dangling like lifelines. A flight attendant's voice rang out, firm and urgent, instructing everyone to secure their masks. Ellie fumbled with hers, the elastic band catching in her hair. She pulled it over her face, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. In the cockpit, chaos reigned. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, and alarms blared in deafening intervals. "Hydraulics are failing," Jenna shouted, her voice strained. "We're losing control." Raymond wrestled with the yoke, sweat beading on his forehead. He glanced at the altimeter. It was dropping fast. Too fast. "Mayday, mayday!" Raymond barked into the radio. "This is Flight 451. We're experiencing multiple system failures. Requesting immediate emergency landing clearance." There was no response. Only static. The plane shuddered again, a terrible groan reverberating through the cabin. Ellie's heart pounded as she clung to her seat, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't string together. A woman across the aisle was clutching her child, tears streaming down her face. Somewhere near the back, a man was shouting incoherently, his panic spreading like wildfire. The engines roared louder, their sound unnatural and grating. Then, without warning, the left wing dipped, and the plane went into a steep descent. Gravity pressed Ellie into her seat, the force making it nearly impossible to move. The cabin was chaos now, screams, sobs, prayers. Over it all, the relentless voice of the flight attendant repeated instructions that no one seemed able to follow. Through the window, Ellie saw the ground rushing toward them, a patchwork of forest and rivers growing larger by the second. Her mind blanked, the sheer terror consuming every coherent thought. She shut her eyes, gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. The impact was inevitable. She braced herself for the end. The crash was deafening. Metal screamed against earth, the impact splitting the plane into jagged halves. Ellie felt herself thrown forward, her seatbelt cutting into her chest. The world was a blur of motion, sound, and pain. Then silence. When she opened her eyes, everything was still. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid, stinging her lungs. She coughed, her throat raw, and looked around. The plane was unrecognizable, a twisted skeleton of what it had been. Seats were scattered, debris strewn everywhere. Fires burned in small pockets, their orange glow illuminating the carnage. Ellie's hands shook as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Pain radiated through her body, but she ignored it, her instincts screaming at her to move. Around her, survivors stirred, their groans of pain mingling with the crackle of flames. The teenager beside her was unconscious, blood trickling down his forehead. She reached out, shaking his shoulder. "Hey! Can you hear me?" he groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Ellie felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. A loud crack split the air, and she looked up to see part of the cabin's roof sagging dangerously. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice firm despite the panic rising in her chest. Helping the boy to his feet, Ellie stumbled toward an opening where the plane's wall had been torn away. The forest loomed outside, dark and foreboding, but it was their only chance. She glanced back at the wreckage, at the faces of those still trapped or too injured to move. Guilt clawed at her, but survival was a stronger force. She stepped into the unknown, the cool night air biting at her skin. The forest was eerily silent, as though the crash had scared even the animals into hiding. The boy followed her, limping but determined. Behind them, the remains of Flight 451 burned like a beacon, a reminder of how quickly life could change. Ellie didn't know where they were or how they would survive. But one thing was certain, they were alive. And they weren't alone.